Stop everything for a second, because if you're still training with 12 repetitions, you're probably sabotaging your results without even realizing it. Training with 12 repetitions is a mistake. And what's shocking is that gyms continue passing this rule down to their students as if it were a law. I'm going to explain exactly why they do this, and more importantly, why you absolutely should not follow it. To truly understand this entire problem, we need to take a short but essential lesson in muscle physiology. Inside your muscles, there are several types of fibers. But to keep this clear and didactic, we'll focus on the three most important ones. First, we have type I fibers. These are slow-twitch fibers, highly resistant to fatigue, but relatively weak. Then we have type IIa fibers. These are fast fibers, capable of producing much more strength. And finally, type IIx fibers, previously known as type IIb, which are extremely fast, capable of generating a massive amount of force and power, but they fatigue very quickly, prematurely. So why am I telling you all this? Some time ago, a study was published by one of the greatest researchers in bodybuilding science, arguably the greatest in the world, Brad Schoenfeld. And what he demonstrated was simple and revolutionary at the same time. Whether you perform 3 repetitions or 30 repetitions, the hypertrophic result can be the same. More recently, another study showed individuals performing close to 150 repetitions and still generating hypertrophy. So where did this obsession with 3 sets of 12 come from? It makes no sense, and by the end of this explanation, you'll clearly understand why. Schoenfeld showed that doing very few repetitions or very many repetitions leads to the same result if intensity is present. Let's break this down. When you use a light load and start an exercise, your strongest fibers type IIa and type IIx essentially stay inactive. They don't need to help. Why? Because the load is light. Type I fibers, the weakest fibers, are perfectly capable of handling that work. Your body is extremely intelligent. It always chooses the most economical strategy possible, meaning it uses the least amount of energy necessary to perform a task. If type I fibers can do the job alone, your body will let them. So you start the set. Repetition after repetition, those type I fibers keep working. They begin to fatigue. This is what we call accumulated fatigue. The muscle in the second repetition is already more fatigued than in the first. The muscle in the 10th repetition is more fatigued than in the second. It's the same muscle, but progressively more tired. Eventually, those type I fibers can no longer continue. Let's say you're performing a set of 10, 15 repetitions. At some point, the type I fibers are exhausted and cannot keep going. But your body doesn't stop because you told it to keep working. So what does it do? It recruits type IIa fibers. They jump in and help you push further, 16th, 17th, 18th repetition, and so on. But these fibers fatigue faster because they are stronger and faster. Now imagine you reach your 23rd or 24th repetition. At this point, type IIa fibers are also exhausted. Type I fibers are already done. So what does your body do next? Type IIx fibers step in. They give you one final push. They can generate force, but they fatigue almost instantly. You grind out a few more repetitions and finally fail around the 30th rep. What just happened? You performed one set of 30 repetitions to failure. But to reach that number, you had to use a light load. That light load gradually fatigued all fiber types until complete exhaustion. If you reached failure, the muscle was stimulated. And if it was stimulated, it will grow. Why did Schoenfeld use 30 repetitions? Because that was his question. Could hypertrophy occur with such high reps? And the answer was yes. Now here's the key insight. Why did people who performed fewer repetitions get the same results? Because high repetitions gradually create fatigue until intensity becomes high. On the other hand, when you use a heavy load, your body instantly understands that type I fibers alone won't handle it. Even type I plus type IIa won't be enough. So what does it do? It recruits all fibers from the very first repetition. In one scenario, fatigue builds progressively. In the other, all fibers engage immediately. Different paths, same destination. When you reach failure with heavy loads, whether it's 3, 4 or 5 reps, all fibers are fatigued because they were all active from the start. The number of repetitions changes, but the level of fatigue does not. That's the point. Did anyone at your gym ever explain this to you? Probably not. Now you begin to understand that there's far more behind training than what's written on a workout sheet. And in this video, I'll explain exactly why gyms keep passing this outdated method forward. So why doesn't 3 sets of 12 work? Because I don't want you focused on counting repetitions. Bodybuilders have known this for decades. And today, science proves that obsessing over rep numbers is meaningless. So why are you still worrying about reps? When I talk about the NoReps methodology, the idea is simple. Stop counting repetitions. When you stop counting, your focus shifts to what actually matters: intensity. How much intensity is your muscle receiving? That's the real question. Forget the rep count. Focus on intensity, because that's what drives growth. Brad Schoenfeld's study made this crystal clear. Participants trained to failure or very close to failure, sometimes leaving 2 or 3 repetitions in reserve. You don't always need to hit absolute failure, but intensity must be high. Now here's where repetition counting creates serious problems. If you pick up a weight and say, "I'm doing 12 reps because that's what the program says," what happens? You hit 12 and stop, even if intensity was low. Why stop? Because the goal was 12. It was written on the sheet. But what if you could have done more? That set was wasted. On the other hand, some people increase the load. They say, "I have to do 12. They reach rep 11 and can't continue with proper form, but they still force the 12th rep. They compensate. They cheat. They enter a dangerous zone, doing it at any cost. Result? Either poor stimulus and no progress, or injury. Very few people can consistently choose the perfect load for exactly 12 reps at optimal intensity. So what do you prefer? A smarter, more precise system, or endless trial and error that leads to stagnation or injury? Instead of counting repetitions, the focus shifts to how the body actually responds to the work. Training becomes about managing rest, controlling intensity, and paying attention to real physical feedback. And now, it's time to reveal why gyms still use this outdated 3 sets of 12 model and why many instructors defend it. Here's the truth. First, many professionals simply don't know better, or they're too lazy to study deeper. Second, it's easier. It's much easier to hand someone a sheet and say 3 sets of 12 than to teach thousands of people how to train intelligently. So the real question is, are you going to keep accepting this? If you're a beginner, this conversation would be different. At that stage, coordination and technique matter more than intensity. But if you're not a beginner, then this system, 3 of 12, 3 of 10, is outdated. And it's used by people who don't study and don't want to go deeper. Good luck with your training, and until next time, keep moving, my friends.